Hello and welcome to the program. Thank you so much for tuning in today here on Health Professional Radio. I'm your host, Neal Howard, for this segment. And we're joined by Dr. Gerard Marek. He's earned his MD and PhD in psychopharmacology at the University of Chicago. His residency training was in psychiatry at the Yale University in the School of Medicine. He moved to Astellas a little over 3 years ago, and he's joining us here on HPR to talk about his role at Astellas and some R&D goals there. Welcome to the program, Dr. Marek.
Well, thank you very much.
Thanks. Now, I gave a little bit of a background. Why don't you give our listeners a bit more insight into your area of expertise?
Well, as you heard, I'm trained in psychiatry and have both bench training in the lab, having done behavioral research, and also then later on when I went on to Yale doing electrophysiology. So I've had a fair amount of experience on the preclinical laboratory side, and as well as on the clinical side, where we do the phase 1, phase 2, and then phase 3 studies, where first we determine safety in humans, and then in phase 1, then phase 2 is where we determine both efficacy and safety in humans and make a decision whether or not it looks like we actually have a drug that could go all the way, and then phase 3 is really to conduct confirmatory efficacy studies that show adequate efficacy for the drug to be approved.
Does that pretty much define your role at Astellas?
Right. Here at Astellas, I'm working on the clinical side, and we obviously work in close consultation with our preclinical colleagues as well, because there's a lot of given back and translation both directions all the time.
Now, I understand that there's been the opening of a new site just this past June, as a matter of fact. What are some of the goals at this ARIA site?
Well, the primary goals are really to bring forth innovative treatments that are going to be making a difference in the lives of patients with CNS disorders. And the kinds of conditions and disease states that they're most thinking about right now at ARIA are things like schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. Schizophrenia is a disorder where it affects about 1% of the population, so it's actually relatively common, and it has a strong genetic influence, but also a very strong environmental influence. And it's a disorder where people hear things or think things that other people don't necessarily think, like delusions, which are positive symptoms, but you also have negative symptoms where they really don't feel like engaging in tasks or don't feel like they gain pleasure from things. Mm-hmm. But then you also have a lot of cognitive dysfunction where they're really quite impaired compared to where they would be if they didn't have schizophrenia or compared just to the general population. And then bipolar disorder there's a large range in which patients with bipolar, but a good half of the patients have what's called bipolar disorder with psychosis, where they are also really virtually quite impaired from a cognitive standpoint as much as patients are with schizophrenia. Those are some of the main primary clinical focuses currently.
So we're talking about ongoing research on most of the conditions that you talked about. Are you collaborating with any other institutions there, or is this something that you've embarked upon solely by yourselves?
Well, no, I mean, the groundwork for all this is really largely work with the Lieber Institute, working on sort of a genetic basis for these disorders and understanding that, but going beyond just sort of large-scale genetic studies called GWAS studies, but to actually really look at sort of the RNA analysis from the brains of schizophrenic patients at the Lieber Institute in Baltimore. So Miki Matsumoto is the one that's been really spearheading this and encouraging this research, and then this has really led to a number of different projects and sort of candidate target molecules to intervene on, and then they take some of these insights and then essentially make mouse genetic models using knockout models and such that can be used then to develop novel treatment paradigms.
How much of the information, once finalized, is distributed to institutes of higher learning in their psychology and psychiatry departments?
Well, I mean, there is ongoing research with a number of different places. So, in addition to what I just talked about with the Lieber Institute, there's a lot of consultation and collaboration ongoing with, like, say, for example, in the San Diego area with Salk and also the UCSD. And then also we have other close ongoing work, for example, with University of Southern California and Steve Siegel there. So, and then there's even, it's even actually around the globe as well. We have work ongoing with Professor Cynthia Weichert in Sydney as well. So there's a really very wide range of collaborations that are ongoing, throughout the world. But the site at ARIA is sort of capitalizing on the fact that in Southern California, there's a very, very strong psychiatry background there with a lot of great basic research that complements the clinical research that's ongoing there.
And briefly talk about your background in pharmaceuticals as those relate to schizophrenia and things of that nature that you just mentioned. What do you see on the horizon, 20 years from now? Are we talking ongoing and improved treatments, or are we really going to be able to maybe eradicate some of these conditions?
Well, I mean, how far we can attenuate schizophrenia probably depends upon how well we can sort of go back in the disease. It probably isn't realistic to think that we can give a treatment to patients after they've really essentially had their, gone much beyond their first psychotic break in their early 20s or so. The first psychotic break is where they are essentially disconnected with reality and are having delusions that thoughts that people don't normally have, or having like auditory hallucinations or hearing voices, sometimes commanding them to do certain things. We probably need to intervene most likely in some of the earlier stages where even in adolescence, patients start to become help-seeking, and there's a lot of clinical high-risk sites currently that are trying to understand how can we identify these subjects early on, because of these subjects that come in and that are under duress during their adolescent years, only roughly about maybe a quarter of them will go on down the path to schizophrenia. There's a lot of active work to develop a range of biomarkers or demographic kinds of clues that will really help us identify more certain of which patients will go down this route of schizophrenia. So that's actually going to be a key part of this, because certainly it's one thing if you're giving patients pharmaceutical, small molecule, and chemical like we've been doing for many years. For some of these treatments that we're talking about, we might need to be thinking about other means of having an intervention that may down the road include things like treating people with adenoviruses, and at the present time we'll probably have to keep the type of intervention as minimal as possible. But down the road, when we become more certain how well these will work, then you start to reaching a point where sort of a greater degree of the intervention at a higher risk level will be warranted, certainly. So over the next 20 years, there probably will be quite a revolution in the kinds of things that we're doing.
Now, where can we go online and get some more information about Astellas and some of these conditions that you've been talking about and some of the treatments that you're working on there?
Well, these treatments that I'm describing right now, and these projects, they're still very, very in the very, very early stages. So we don't actually publicize them. We actually were at a meeting recently on personalized medicine in which we were talking about some of these issues. So we certainly are talking about the fact that we're looking in this direction. And I think what you'll be hearing about in the future is that the nature of these issues are so profound that this is one of those areas where what we're looking to is to actually reaching out to some of our competitors, essentially, and to going where we can do pre-competitive research, that the kind of research that really benefits everyone. And there's a really a need to do that, because some of the most greatest advances in areas like Alzheimer's disease too is only coming because of sort of these types of pre-competitive collaborations, such in the Alzheimer's area like ADNI, which has allowed the government to work together with industry and academia. And I think those are the things to really be on the lookout for, these kinds of large-scale collaborations that are going to really be required to really bring forward the kinds of treatments that we're desperately seeking to for patients that really have very, very minimal options at the present time.
Well, I'm thanking you for coming in and talking with us today. It sounds extremely promising from the psychiatry side. Hoping you'll come back and talk with us some more. Looking forward to some more conversations with you.
Well, thank you very much. I'm very happy to speak about this because it's an area in which we care about a great deal here at Astellas.
You've been listening to Health Professional Radio. I'm your host, Neal Howard, with Dr. Gerard Marek of Astellas. Transcripts and audio of this program are available at healthprofessionalradio.com.au and also at hpr.fm. You can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, listen in and download at SoundCloud, and be sure and visit our affiliates page when you visit us at hpr.fm and healthprofessionalradio.com.au.